We're looking at our F9 income statement here, and currently this report is using two segments of the F9 formula. Now this formula works perfectly fine for the type of report we're looking at here. We currently have a March actual and a March budget, but if you want to change your March budget to, say, year-to-date March actual, we can simply just come down here and change our period specifier. I'm going to change it to year-to-date March. Hit enter, calculate the worksheet, and now we have a March actual and a year-to-date March actual. However, if you want to run a comparative income statement, in other words, if you want to have a column for March 2008 and compare it to March 2007, you're going to be required to use additional segments in this F9 formula. And that brings us back to this diagram that I had showed you earlier. Now on our diagram here, I'm going to select the F9 formula, and currently we're just using the two segments, and that's just like our report over here, the two segments. Back over on our diagram here. Now when we're using just the two segments in the F9 formula, we're only specifying the account number. That's our first segment here. We're referencing that account number there. The second segment is our period specifier, currently is March. Now when we're only using the two segments, we're not specifying the company, the third segment here, and we're not specifying the year, the fourth segment, and we're not specifying the budget type, which is the fifth segment. It defaults to whatever is on the F9 setup screen. Let me bring that up and we'll demonstrate. And I'll get this out of your way. See, the third segment is the company. It defaults to what's on the setup screen. The fourth segment's a year. Here's the year here. And the budget type, whether it's original or the revised, whatever you have selected here, that's the type budget it will pull into the formula. Now, if you want to run a comparative income statement, you're going to be required to reference more than 1 year. And currently on this setup screen, we can only select 1 year at a time. So we're going to add additional segments to this F9 formula. Now, I've got an F9 comparative report over here. Now, notice when I click in the cell here, we're using 4 segments in this F9 formula, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I'll take you through this report so that you can understand how F9 is using these 4 segments in this F9 formula. Now, the first difference that you see between this report, this comparative report, and our regular F9 report over here is we just have 2 cells down here. On our comparative report, we've got additional yellow cells here. Now these are named cells. We'll click on this. If I click in that cell, I named this cell company. This one I named it year 1, this one year 2, and this one I named comparative period. Now, just for your information, when you're naming cells, when you're naming a cell, it doesn't like spaces. That's why I've named this comparative period all one word. Now, the other difference between this comparative report and the regular report is in this F9 report, we are using 4 segments in the F9 formula itself. So let's go through this formula. So in the formula here, the first segment is always your account number segment, and it's referencing this K12 over here, and this is the range of accounts. The second segment is the period specifier segment, and it's referencing that cell named comparative period, which is currently this cell here, and the period specifier itself is March. The third segment, company, it's referencing the cell named company, and that's this cell here, which is currently SDH, or Sunny Day Hospice. The fourth segment is referencing the cell named year 2, and currently the current year in that cell is 2008. So what we're looking at here are the revenues for the period of March for the company of Sunny Day Hospice and year 2008. Now the only difference between this formula in this column and the formula in this column is we're just referencing year 1. So now it's just referencing year 2007, and you see that in the column header here, March 2007, March 2008. Now that we're specifying within the F9 formula itself the company and year, it no longer defaults to what is on the F9 setup screen. It no longer defaults to this company. It no longer defaults to this year. So now you have a report that goes over multiple years. Now, just to demonstrate here, let's say you want 2006 and 2007. Hit enter. I calculate the workbook. And now you have March 2007, March 2006. Let's go back to 2007 and 2008. And let's say you want year-to-date March instead of the period March. Well, put in this period specifier, hit enter, calculate the workbook, and now that quickly we have a comparative for year-to-date March 2008 and year-to-date March 2007. Now, in this report and in the F9 formulas, we're still just using 4 segments. There is a 5th segment, and if you remember back over on the diagram over here, it pertains to the budget type, whether it's going to be your original budget or your revised budget. So I'm just going to go back over to this comparative report, and we'll get this 5th segment added in here. So we're going to name a cell here called budget type. I'm just giving it a row header there. I want to name this particular cell. I'm going to name it budget type. Now when I type in there, I hit enter for it to take the name. Enter again. Now when I click back up in there, again, now the cell is named budget type. And for consistency, let's highlight it yellow, and we'll give it the same border. And I'm going to type in here either original or revised. To start out with, I'm going to put in original. Now, in the formula itself, we need to add this 5th segment. Now, I'm just going to type up into the formula itself. I'm going to add a comma. That separates the segments. And then I'm just going to reference my cell named budget type. Pulls that up into the formula. I hit enter. And now when I click back up into the formula, we notice that we're pulling the budget type into the formula itself. Now, I still need to add the 5th segment in this column. Just do the same thing. Enter the comma. Reference the cell named budget type. Hit enter. And actually, I need to do the same thing down here. Comma. Reference the cell budget type. Hit enter. Once more over here. Doing a comma. Referencing the cell named budget type. Hit enter. Now that I've got these here, I can do a copy and do a paste. There's my paste. Calculate the workbook. Now I'm going to change my period specifier back to March, and I'm going to calculate the workbook. I just calculated the workbook. Now there's something I want to point out in this report. This report is still reporting actual figures, March 2008, March 2007, because our period specifier is just saying March and not March budget. It's still actual report, even though we've added this 5th segment for specifying the type budget, whether it's original or revised. This 5th segment really doesn't come into play within the formula itself until we change the period specifier. Now, if I change this to March budget, hit enter, now the period specifier is March budget. If I calculate the workbook, I just calculated it there now. Now it's pulling in budget figures for March budget 2008, March budget 2007. Or I really should say original March budget 2008 and original March budget 2007, because that's the type budget we're pulling in is the original. Now, if we wanted the revised budget information, I would just type revised in here, recalculate the workbook, and then it would pull in the revised budget figures. Now, I happen to know that Sunny Day Hospice does not have a revised budget, so I can't actually demonstrate that. And now you have an example of a report using the 5 segments of an F9 formula.